Well, everybody, we are excited tonight to continue to get to know our new future Big 12 foes. Last week, we talked to Sons of UCF about Central Florida joining the conference, and this week we've got the guys from Pawd Slama Jama here joining us. We love that podcast name, by the way. We thought both were like, we got to get that pod on when we saw it. We got Andy and we got Day on here to teach us everything we need to know about Houston, to give us their thoughts on them joining the conference. And so we're excited about that, guys.
Doing
Welcome
good.
to the tailgate.
Thank you
How
for
are y'all
having
doing
us. We
tonight?
appreciate the platform, the opportunity to be your guys' guests.
Yeah, we're looking forward to it, guys. So let's just start it off with an easy one. Just kind of tell us about y'all's podcast and y'all's connection
I'll
to
take that
the
one first,
University of
just in
Houston.
terms of when we first launched. The idea for Pawd Slama Jama is actually a funny story because similar to you guys, we started around that COVID right before the start of the COVID season. We started around August 2020, and originally we were only focusing on men's and women's basketball at the University of Houston. Obviously, of course, what Calvin Sampson has been able to build up at the University of Houston, we thought, we originally launched as a podcast platform focusing on Houston hoops. That was not only, of course, we were on the University of Houston side, but another podcast on the Houston Rockets side, the local pro sports team here in Houston. So that's how we originally launched. We did that for for 1 year, and originally we had a rotating co-host panel. Then obviously, of course, the men's basketball team goes on the Final Four run. That's when Dayon kind of joined after that, and last summer we kind of started covering a little bit of football, and this past year we've moved on and we've kind of launched starting to have the video portion. So we actually have our videos streamed on YouTube as well, so our video podcast platforms, and
Cool.
that's pretty much the story. Dayon, if there's anything you wanted to add just from since when you joined.
I mean, you pretty much covered it. When I joined, it was like Andy said, it was specifically more basketball. Then we kind of pitched the idea, let's get some football in there because they were kind of having a little bit of success. And so, I mean, just thought of expanding, and it's been going really well.
Well, cool. Let's get into some Texas Tech and Houston history. So out of the four schools joining the conference, we have the most familiarity with Houston, as we faced many times. We go back to the Southwestern Conference back in those days too. So Texas Tech leads the football series 18-14, currently on a 4-game win streak against Houston. Our last basketball meeting was just this back in 2020, the COVID season, as many people remember it by. Unfortunately for Texas Tech, we lost that matchup to Houston. And then we've also faced each other off in baseball. Our last meeting was in 2020 in baseball. I think we won that game 3-2. So we are familiar with the University of Houston. So let's just start it off. Tell us everything Texas Tech fans might not know about the University of Houston from the outside.
I'll go first,
and
then Dayon, you can sprinkle in after. But just starting from kind of the football perspective and the matchups, I think certainly the past couple of them. Obviously, you said Texas Tech's like on a 4-game winning streak on the football field. The past 2 games. Of course, the past 2 games certainly have been kind of down games for Houston, just in terms of the 1-2 years ago. I believe it was in 2018 when they last time they played in Lubbock, where Texas Tech put on, I think they might have set a record. I think they ended up putting up 62 points, or they got up there. It might have been 63 up there in points, and they just torched the Houston defense. And then obviously, of course, they met this past season, 2021, the start of the new season here at NRG Stadium. They jumped out to, what was it, a 24-7 lead, and
y'all scored y'all scored on the first possession, got the onside kick, scored again.
And Houston fans are all riding high, and then they go scoreless. They get shut out in the second half and lose 38-24, coming off the past 2 years that Dana Holderson had been the head coach. A lot of Houston fans started to kind of be as pessimistic as possible, not only on Dana Holderson, but the starting quarterback, who was Clayton Tune, who had, I believe that was like his 3rd full season with Houston being the starter, and it did not get off to a good start. I think he threw 4 interceptions. So certainly some history. And Dayon, I'll toss it over to you just in terms of what kind of that Texas Tech Houston rivalry has been like as of late.
For me, it's been the biggest rivalry outside of SMU. I know we've seen SMU, but that's the only Texas school outside of SMU that we've played. And like Andy just mentioned, the last 2 years, I kind of feel like Houston gave the game away. I'm sure you guys feel like you guys took it and earned the win for sure. But, I mean, me and Andy always talk a lot about that matchup specifically. And I would love to hear you guys' perspective on your football program and get more insight, the new coaching staff, and how you guys feel about the direction of your I'm sure we'll get into it more, but specifically for those last 2 matchups, man, I'm excited for this one. I need some payback. I got to have it.
Yeah, we were feeling pretty good after that comeback win. I know that. Dustin, you got anything for him?
I think we were mostly surprised that we came back and won that one, and then we were surprised later in the season when y'all rolling and weren't losing to anybody else, and we're like, we're lucky we beat them because they should have crushed us because we couldn't beat anybody else the rest of the year.
Yeah, we had to fire our coach. Things, that was probably the high point of the season at one point, and then, other than that, it was pretty forgetful season and up until the very end. So just kind of going off that, what are Houston fans like? Dayon, we'll start with you on that. Because we only see him at the tailgates in some of these games. What are real Houston fans like? What are they like on Twitter? I don't know if y'all saw one of Tech Pod was doing competitions on who's the craziest fan base and stuff like that. So what should we expect for Houston?
Houston fans, they're tricky. I'm not gonna lie, they're tricky because they support the team if they're winning. But me and Andy have had this conversation often. They come to see the other team. I mean, they come to support Houston when Houston is doing well, but they come to really see the other. If it's so, like for Texas Tech, for example, they come for that matchup not only to see Houston, but to see the Houston Texas Tech. And then you have some of the other matchups that we play in the American where the crowds are just hit or miss. Yeah. But like from SMU games, they come out for that. So Houston fans are tricky in the sense of attendance. But on Twitter, it's a lot of Houston stand accounts. I will say on Twitter, they get active. They talk trash.
And to follow up, I think the perfect word to describe it is they're kind of fickle. Because especially when you look at it from the men's basketball perspective and how successful they have been for the past few years, that fan base, I mean, they sell out almost every game. Those atmospheres get real rowdy, especially when going to American Athletic Conference rivalries. Whenever Memphis comes in town, those are the best atmospheres. This past season when they played Virginia in non-conference, that was a really, really rowdy crowd. But then when you look at the football perspective, like we had mentioned, the first 2 years under Dana Holderson, they didn't necessarily go as well as they would have liked it to have been in terms of wins. I remember going back to the COVID season when even it was at 25% capacity, so the crowd was already pretty sparse, and they played BYU in non-conference, and it was probably 50-50 BYU fans at TDCU Stadium. But this coming season this following season when it turned around and then they started to go on that winning streak, and part of it has to do, of course, with the non-conference opponents. No offense to who Houston played this past season, but Rice, Grambling, and those schools don't necessarily build a lot of buzz when it comes to a big game atmosphere. They played Texas Tech, but that game was at NRG Stadium as well. It wasn't on campus. So that part of it has to do with a big factor. But, I mean, if you go back to the mid-2010s, 2014, 2015, when the football team was rolling and they beat Florida State in the Peach Bowl in Atlanta, that's you can kind of see that when the program is rolling, that's kind of the blueprint. They do show out. They would pack out TDCU Stadium. They would sell out. It was a hard ticket to get into, but that just goes back to say they're kind of fickle when it comes to it has to be a winning program before they show that support. Now, maybe they've turned the corner, and especially with the football season, the football team with the season they were able to put together, maybe there'll be more buzz going forward. But again, when you look at the non-conference, Texas Tech game is going to be on the road. They play UTSA on the road, and the two games are Kansas and Rice, the non-conference home games. Again, not necessarily the best non-conference schedule.
Yeah.
Daniel, I want to follow up with your kind of attendance point you had there. Do you think some of that might be because Houston's such a big city and metropolitan area, and you have a lot of other alumni bases in the Houston area, and like Lubbock, you have the vast majority of Texas Tech alumni.
Yeah.
And Houston, the city of Houston, might be the other way around.
Yeah, I think that has a huge factor. It is a huge factor that plays a part into it. But at the same time, like Andy just said, when the team is rolling, like I remember when Louisville came into town, Lamar Jackson, that was the biggest crowd I've seen at TDECU Stadium. And so I definitely think that is. But the alumni, they come weekly. They come routinely. So the student fans come routinely. It's just, like you said, I definitely think that is a factor because there's so much other things to do going on. You got all the other schools, the Rockets and Texans, all the other things. But when Houston is rolling and they're having success, the fans will show out. But I definitely do think, and also with Houston being a commute school, that also plays a part into it as well, I think.
Cool. So going to Houston, joining the Big 12 coming up soon. Start with you, Dayon. What does that mean for Houston and you guys with Houston coming to the Big 12 athletically?
I think it means a lot. I think now we're talking about the fans being fickle. I think it's a ton of excitement, especially with the recent success, specifically with football and basketball, and even the women's basketball kind of on the fence, but specifically football and men's football and basketball, it's excitement. Everyone's excited. They've been waiting since 2016 when they were denied, and so it's a ton of excitement. They're ready. They're chomping at the bit, and really, I mean, I'm lost for words because everything that I hear from Twitter, you see from people, everyone is really, really excited. And so I think Houston fans and the team's recruitment is going better. I think all around Houston is really, really preparing themselves from the administrative side to the football side. I think everyone is really, really excited to join the Big 12.
Yeah, Andy, same question for you. And question we ask UCF, like, what do you think this does for Houston recruiting wise? Because y'all are in a really big area of Texas, close to Louisiana there, hot recruiting trail over there. So, like, your thoughts on Houston joining the Big 12?
Obviously, it's going to be a huge
what do you think
boost
that does for y'all recruiting
the city of Houston, especially finally being like Dayon had mentioned, being denied a Power 5, being able to be a part of a Power 5 conference for so long, since the Southwestern Conference fell apart so long ago. And especially when you look at the city of Houston and high school football here in the city, it is such a hotbed for talent. And for the longest, you had not only obviously, of course, the cream, the top schools from Alabama to Clemson, all these schools that are recruiting in Texas. But then, of course, when you just think of within the state, the premier programs, or at least the brand premier, when it comes to the University of Texas, Texas A&M, those schools, they tended to get a lot of the local talent. Now, Houston kind of catches up a little bit when it comes to certainly football recruiting, because now they can pitch more the kind of the lure of staying home, and that obviously, of course, with Texas going to the SEC and Texas A&M already being there, there'd still be a little bit of not necessarily a even playing field, but when you look at some of the other schools in Texas, when it comes to like Baylor, Texas Tech, TCU, Houston's going to be much more on an even playing field, and that's certainly going to benefit the Cougars in the long run, and especially if they can build on the success for football, specifically on the success that they had last season, and prove that it wasn't just a one-year one-off. They're building something here, and I think it's going to go a long way, especially with just the moves that they've been able to make this past offseason. Dana Holderson, and one of the stuff that his coaching staff has done a real good job of is getting transfers from other schools, and that's really been kind of his biggest strength so far, that he's been here at the University of Houston and getting players that way. Now that's not necessarily going to be the place that he can get them straight out of high school, because when you think of football, they're not necessarily landing a lot of these 5-star, 4-star recruits. I mean, when you look at 5-star and down, you can talk to me, you can, speak up. But I believe the last time they got a high 5-end recruit, it was probably Ed Oliver.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was Ed Oliver, and to add on to the recruiting, most of your transfer that they have are from the state of Texas, and so they are recruiting in state.
From us.
Just big, and I think if they can continue success, they will start getting maybe some of these 4, maybe even 5-star recruits, because they will have something to build on. Like all the points that Andy just mentioned, going into the Big 12, it's an even playing field, because you got the likes of Oklahoma State and Oklahoma, all those schools who coming into Texas and getting recruits out of Texas, specifically Houston. And so Dana Holderson said they are recruiting Houston hard. Every athlete in Houston, they're recruiting them hard. And so I'm expecting them to get more recruits out of high school, but their transfer portal really has been nice for Houston.
So, Dan, I want to stay on football since we kind of already on that track. What are y'all's thoughts on Dana Holderson and his new kind of regime and takeover and the great season last year and where that football program is going under him?
I think, he's done an outstanding job. From in his last couple of years, because when he first got here, a lot of the players, he had to kind of weed out players who didn't want to be in Houston or under his regime, under his team, and then it was a lot of things with players as far as red shirt. There's a lot of different obstacles he had to jump over and hurdle through. And so over the last couple of years, I think one thing he's really done is build a great staff. I think he has a really, really good staff, highlighted by Doug Belk, who's one of the most highly talented coordinators right now, defensive coordinator. They retained him. And so early on, it was okay. The COVID year, I didn't really put much stock in it because it is what it is. But last year, I expected them to do what they did specifically because of the strength of the schedule. This year, I'm expecting the same thing. And so just kind of, I feel he's done a good job being on where the program was at when he got here, what he had to do to kind of build his culture in the direction that they're going now. So I think he's done a fair job, a good job over the last couple of years for sure.
And Andy, I'll let you get in there too, but I also want to kind of wiggle around different ways. And I asked the UCF guys this. As Dana Holgerson's being a former Power 5 head coach at West Virginia, how do you think that helps that transition?
He's already been there. He's done that. And I go back to the spring practices, and I think it was the final media availability he had for the final spring practice they had open to reporters, and he talked about it. That's really when kind of the talks began to intensify, that an agreement was going to get reached with the American Athletic Conference, and they were going to be able to join the Big 12 by their target, which was by July of 2023. And Dana Holderson had been adamant throughout the process that, and not just Holderson, Kelvin Sampson as well, being a part of that, the history that he had at, obviously, of course, at Oklahoma, Indiana. Both of those coaches, they've done a good job just because Houston is joining the Big 12, that doesn't mean that the work is done. And I can't remember, I believe it's Kelvin Sampson that says it, but both of them have kind of paraphrased more or less, and that's that the work is really beginning for Houston in that athletic department. And even just last week, the University of Houston Athletics Department announced that they had launched a $150 million fundraising campaign just to be able to catch up and try to upgrade a lot of these facilities. So I'm not sure if for your listeners that they've been aware, but Houston is gonna. They just had this past winter, I think it was February, they had a new football facility approved, which they're set to have it be completed by 2024, I want to say, but that would essentially be, so right now the football program, they have an indoor football facility where they can practice on turf fields and all like that, but this would be more of an essentially football only facility where both the men's and women's basketball team have a facility like that currently. They call it the Guy V. Lewis facility, and obviously it's a space just for those programs to have by themselves, and that hasn't been the case with football. So that's really what most of the fundraising money is going to be going towards that building, which would one, give obviously, of course, the football team a huge boost, but kind of give more space to a lot of these other programs, the Olympic sports, the baseball program actually has its own facility as well. But when you look at volleyball, you look at softball, you look at the track and field, the swimming programs, they kind of need more of those space to themselves, which would clear it up a lot, and that's just a huge bonus because, you know, you have Sampson, you have Holderson who have been there, and they're doing a really good job of being able to, one, navigate the whole realignment once they join the Big 12, but also kind of know what they need to be competitive in the Big 12 once that comes. I mean, Kelvin Sampson last week said that they're not joining the Big 12 just to be thankful that they were giving a spot in the conference. They want to compete, were his words, and those two coaches are the perfect candidates to be able to lead them because, like I said, they have been there before.
Yeah, what is Houston fans' vibe with Dana? Because he's a crazy person, right? He chugs Red Bulls. Is there going to be a huge, gigantic fridge full of Red Bulls at this new football facility? Like, do Houston fans love him, or is it just kind of depending on his
hair?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you,
crazy. He's a crazy
from the especially 2020 once. I think they had gotten off to I want to say 2-1 start or 3-1 start, and then they ended up losing like 4-3 straight, and they had fallen under 500. The fan base seemed to be a little bit frustrated with the direction of the program. But this past season, it kind of turned around, especially after the Texas Tech game.
Yeah.
They really seem to embrace Dana Holgerson's quirkiness, especially when it comes to, there was a sign, and I can't remember what exactly it said, but it was a picture of Dana Holgerson's face and Red Bull cans, and they certainly have embraced his personality, especially this past season. There's this funny picture of him that floats around, and I don't know if you can find it and add it in some way, where his hair is just all the way up, and he seems to have a kind of a pouty face. So I think the fan base has certainly embraced him, and for the good times and the bad times. And honestly, they're just looking forward. They kind of believe in the blueprint that he's kind of shown the past season, and that it seems like, especially like Dayon mentioned, with the staff that he's been able to put together, and now with the jump that Clayton Tune took from the first two seasons that were kind of iffy, and the big jump that he had last season, that certainly instilled a lot of confidence in the fan base in Dana Holgerson.
I always joke that he looks like the before picture on those like Bosley commercials, those hair loss commercials. Like, he always looks like the before. There's just no after. And I can say that because I have similar struggles. So, so let's kind of move on to the Texas Tech aspect of this thing. Dayon, you kind of mentioned it earlier. Y'all kind of already consider us a rivalry. So what's the Houston fans' perspective of Texas Tech, kind of from the outside looking in? And then as you come into this conference, kind of what do you expect from this rivalry? And I'll start off with you, Dayon.
Well, coming into it, definitely, I think Houston fans definitely consider Texas Tech a rivalry, and I think they expect to football. For me, I'm gonna speak for myself. Just from the outside looking in, viewing Texas Tech and the success or lack thereof they've had in the Big 12, I think if Houston plans to be compete in the Big 12, I think they have to start by beating Texas Tech. There's no way the last couple of years you can come in and say you want to compete, but Texas Tech has beat you the last couple of years. And so, I mean, I think the rivalry's there. I have a lot of frat brothers from Texas Tech. We talk a lot of trash to each other. So there's I think it's a good relationship between the fans as far as just trash talking and common ground from being from Texas. And so, I mean, I'm very excited about it. I think fans are really happy just to play other Texas schools routinely outside of SMU. So really, I think there's an excitement about it, more about the rivalries, not only with Texas Tech, but from TCU to Baylor, and just instead of playing the likes of Tulsa and the Tulanes of the world, no disrespect to those programs, but I mean, there's not really much excitement there.
Right. Yeah. Andy, same question to you. Like, what are your thoughts on
pretty much
Texas
to add
Tech
on
as
to
y'all
what
come
Dale
into the
said,
Big
I
12
would
next
say
year?
certainly going into the conference, if there was one team that you'd have to pick, that would kind of be a true rivalry right off the gate. I think you'd probably have to put Texas Tech up there. Maybe Baylor too, but just they haven't been able to play that much, especially not on the football field recently. So I think Texas Tech is certainly up there just in terms of the familiarity aspect. You know, we mentioned obviously football. They played twice since 2018. They're going to play again this upcoming season. So that right there is going to be the familiarity aspect of it. And even on the other sports, you know, just going with men's basketball, those have been two programs that have consistently been, you know, producing wins. And the one game that they did play, even though it wasn't that COVID season, it was a really competitive game that Houston was able to kind of edge out Tech at the end, and it would have been really fun if had both teams ran into each other this past season in the NCAA tournament. But I think Texas Tech has certainly got to be the top school when you think of rivalries right out of the gates, just being, like Deion said, that interstate rivalry and just the familiarity aspect to it.
I will say, if I can add one more thing with the basketball, I really love the direction what you guys have doing. First year with a new head coach, continue to succeed. So I will say, although Houston has had success, I will say Tech is probably one step above Houston, if I'm just being honest, as far as you look at their track record from Chris Beard into what they have with Mark Adams, getting to a national title game. Houston hasn't done that. And so although Houston reached the Final Four recent, but they haven't reached a national title game. And so their basketball program is definitely top tier. I'm really excited about that matchup for sure.
Yeah, I just kind of want to stick here with basketball because it is I think the best two programs from our schools right now are both basketball. You know, Sampson has that program as one of the best programs in the country over the last 5 years. You know, he made a Final Four run. Y'all were Elite Eight last year. We made our own Final Four run, Sweet 16 last year. I think we did a little breakdown of all the four new teams a couple weeks ago. We had Houston kind of on the down end on football as excitement because we played y'all a lot. But basketball, we are the most excited about that first time Houston comes to Lubbock, and the USA is just going to be crazy. So, like, what is y'all's thoughts? And we'll just kind of get into the sports side of things here. How do y'all think y'all are going to be able to compete for a basketball championship in the Big 12 right away? I obviously think y'all do. And what are some of the things that you think might be challenging
from
here?
the basketball specifically perspective? No, I agree. I absolutely think that right off the gates, just looking at what Kelvin Sampson has done the last couple of seasons, not the last couple of seasons, the last multiple years, last couple of seasons, they've had deep runs in the NCAA tournament. They made the Sweet 16 going back to 2019. Each of those seasons, obviously excluding the COVID year. The program has just set a standard and now what you're starting to see with the recruiting class, there's a lot of buzz this upcoming season, obviously, of course, because Marcus Sasser chose to return to the University of Houston. He had aspirations. He could have easily kept his name in the NBA draft, but he specifically came back because he turned it unfinished business. Their goal was to try to win a national championship next season, but really the main buzz around this program is they're going to be finally their first 5-star recruit in several years in Jarvis Walker, and really the buzz around him to see what he's able to do under Kelvin Sampson, because for all the success that the men's basketball team has had, that's one thing that they have yet to have, and that's one of these 5-star players that, to be quite frank, if all goes well, he's only going to be here 1 year, and he's going to be, his goal is going to be a lottery pick next season.
Yeah.
Hope that, actually.
Yeah.
Well, and if it doesn't work out, they
even
just
then, when you look at
so.
the men's basketball team for Houston, you don't necessarily see a lot of players transfer out, especially this past season. You look at the year before, they had a couple of players transfer out in Cam Tyson, and I can't remember if it was someone else, but you don't necessarily see, the top end players. If stuff doesn't work out, they kind of tend to stick it out. And Deion, I know you can add on to this, but, just thinking off the top of my head, like, look at a player like Kieran Powell, who's been here for 3 years in the program. He hasn't really gotten a lot of minutes, and yet he's still committed to the program. He stayed, he hasn't transferred out, and that's really rare. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. That's like unheard of now.
Yeah, I think that speaks into the track record of Coach Sampson and his staff being able to develop. So they're trusting in what he's building in the culture. But back to your original question, I think Houston will be able to come in and compete in the Big 12 for a Big 12 championship in basketball as soon as they enter. But I think the biggest challenge and adjustment that they will have to make is the crowds. I don't think they've seen the crowds like they'll see at home from the Texas Tech and going to Kansas and going to Baylor. I think that'd be an adjustment, but Coach Sampson, he has that experience. He has, he knows what it takes. And so I think he'll get his team ready, but still from the players, you have to be in those atmospheres to see what it's like. I do think they'll be ready, but I think there'll be an adjustment period in game. And it's saying around that Coach Kellen Sampson likes to say that the toughest teams always win, and Houston's a very tough team, but those crowds are going to be really, really tough. So I'm excited to see, for me specifically, to come to some of those crowds and see them. So that's one thing on my bucket list, to travel to around the Big 12 and see some of these tough crowds.
Yeah, I think our basketball, since we've been good the last handful of years, basketball games are a lot more fun and intense than football games were in the Leach era when we were really good. Just because, like you said, we packed 14,000 people in there in red and black, and it's crazy, crazy loud. And if it's a good game or a conference in-state rival like that, it's even more.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter if it's a weekday game; those students are still showing up. Weekend game, it doesn't matter what time it is. Brooks drives in an hour for some of these conference games to go to them in the middle of the week. But I wanted to hit on that point a little bit, Dayon, of, do you think the difficulty of the Big 12 conference basketball-wise, because it's been one of the best conferences the last handful of years, the difficulty of that schedule is going to affect you guys? Because it's going to be a lot tougher than playing in the American. You got to go on stretches of at Kansas, Baylor. You get a home game against another top 10 team, and at another top 20 team. It's a rough stretch of games. So what do y'all think? How y'all think y'all can handle that?
I mean, I got to give all praise to the coach, to the head man. Yeah. I mean, he's been there before. I think he's one of the best coaches in the nation. So I have to trust that he'll have his team prepared. But like I just said, I think there will be an adjustment thing with the players, because you will see top 10 players on a back-to-back week basis. You won't go on a stretch to where you play a Memphis team and then you play like a Tulane and a Tulsa. And so, I mean, no disrespect to them, but they're no Texas Tech. They're no Kansas. They're no even TCU, who's on the uprise on the basketball. And so, and Baylor, who I just didn't mention. And so I think there'll be an adjustment period, but Coach Sampson he's not going to sugarcoat things with his players. I think he's going to make sure that they're ready, and he's going to challenge them in practice. And so I think he'll have them ready, but it's going to be tougher than Houston fans think. I think they will drop more games than they will in the American as far as conference play. But I think overall, I think they'll be ready to compete.
Oh, Dayon hit all the points.
And Andy, anything you want to add on to that?
In terms of an adjustment period, especially when you look at crowds, and kudos to the American Athletic Conference in some aspects. When you have to go on the road at SMU, at Memphis, at Cincinnati, those crowds can get rowdy. But then at the same time, you turn around, you have to play in East Carolina, you have to play in USF, and I mean, to be quite frank, sometimes they're playing in mostly empty gyms, and that's not going to be the case once the Big 12 rolls around. It's going to be rowdy every night, and it's only going to be an adjustment period. But I think just when you look at the track record in the past, and obviously, of course, it's much shorter samples, but Houston has shown that they can hang with these programs, and they can play in those atmospheres. Just the first game that pops out of my head last season was at Alabama, where that crowd is really, really ruckus, and Houston had a chance to win it right there in the final possession. And obviously, of course, when you look at Big 12 specific schools, obviously, of course, they played Texas Tech within the past 2 seasons. They played Oklahoma State last year, and they showed that they can have success against those schools. And it'll be interesting. I think when you look at the men's basketball perspective, the 2 matchups that UH fans really probably have circled, one has got to be Baylor, just because of how that Final Four game went. And
Right.
obviously, of course, that has the opportunity to grow into a much deeper rivalry just with the success that program has been able to establish over the course of the seasons. But then obviously, of course, you got to Kansas has got to be at the top there with men's basketball just because of, you mentioned the crowds. That's a bucket list for everyone that's at the University of Houston that follows Houston to experience a basketball game in that stadium, how crazy it is. And then obviously, of course, Kansas coming off a national championship, that's going to be one of those venues that is going to be on the bucket list for sure.
Yeah, I got to go a couple years ago. The season that was ended by COVID, I got to go up to a game there. It's just, if you're a basketball fan, you have to go see a game there. It's nuts. So kind of while we're talking about other Big 12 teams here, and other, let's try to get into some other sports and some things that we don't necessarily know. We know Houston, y'all expect to come in and compete like football wise and basketball wise, but what are some of the other sports that we're maybe not so familiar with, baseball, softball? I don't know what other sports y'all all are bringing over to the Big 12, but some other sports that y'all are expecting to be able to compete for Big 12 championships in right away. I know like UCF came in, they're a really good softball team and really good at some women's sports. So kind of teach us some of the other sports that Houston is thriving in.
The two programs that come to mind are going to be the track and field programs and the swimming and diving programs, just because of how dominant they've been in the American Athletic Conference. I think the swimming and diving team, they've won the American Athletic Conference championship for and I don't want to shorthand them, but I think they've won it for 5 years straight, and it might have been 6. And so they've literally established a dynasty in the American Athletic Conference. So I think they're ready certainly to have a jump and face a much, obviously, of course, a clear-cut, much better competition. When you look at the track and field team, obviously it's going to be a huge loss now that they just lost their head coach, and Leroy Burrell, who went to Auburn. But they're still going to have a good staff just in terms of who they still have back. Carl Lewis, he said he doesn't have aspirations to be the head coach, but he's still going to be with the program, and they've established a level of success where, similar to the swimming and diving team, they're consistently competing in the American Athletic Conference championships and sending multiple athletes over to compete in the NCAA national tournament, not the national tournaments, the national competitions. I think those two programs are going to be ready for that jump.
Right.
I think, and I know we've talked about it a lot, but I think the football team is one program that's kind of wait and see. Obviously, they had a great year this past season, 12-2. They capped it off with a win in the Birmingham Bowl against Auburn as well, and they held their own for a little bit against Cincinnati in that conference championship game. The second half was a completely different story, but they've showed that they're on the right track, and I think it's certainly going to be crucial for the football team to not only build on that success and prove that it wasn't necessarily a one-year fluke, but that they're building something and that they're ready to compete. That's a program where you're kind of like wait and see.
And Dayon, I'll ask you kind of the opposite question here. What are some sports that you think might be a struggle for the start of Houston joining the Big 12 conference? Some of the sports that might not go so smooth.
I think for one, jumps off the back, I think softball will struggle. They haven't had as much success of recent or really of any. So I think that's one. The baseball had their best season in quite a while. So maybe they try to ride the wave and get some recruits and turn things around. But I think those two, and also the women's basketball team, I think this year is a huge year for them to see if they have the talent. It's just about putting it together and really having success. I mean, you have the talent, there's really no excuse in, but you look at the likes of Baylor, Iowa State, who are the top two women's basketball teams in the Big 12, and then there's no pushovers. I mean, they're incredibly better than the teams that they face in the American. So I think on the women's side, the softball, baseball, and also women's basketball, the teams who kind of use the words Andy said, I think it's a wait and approach and see. I think the talent is there on the women's side to compete. They played Baylor last year, in which they competed in the first half, but they had the number one overall pick, Alyssa Smith, who really dominated that game. But their best player, Layla Blair, had a career high 28 points, and she was only a sophomore. And so I think the women's basketball team is one that I can't wait to see how they fare, and not only this upcoming season, but when they go into the Big 12. But like the football and basketball with recruiting, I think it'll help them as well because they can pitch like, hey, we're in the Big 12 now and so much talent in Texas. Now
and
you can stay home and you can play in a Power 5 conference.
Team, I didn't want to shortchange them. They've won the American Athletic Conference championship for the past 6 years, so they're ready. They're ready to make a jump.
All right, so Andy, you mentioned Kansas basketball being a kind of hot topic to go to. What are some other Big 12 teams and sports that you're looking forward to?
Absolutely, I think the first programs that kind of come to the top of the list, especially, it looks like they're going to be sticking around for at least 1 year once all Houston, Cincinnati, UCF, and BYU join the Big 12, and that's obviously, of course, Texas and OU. Especially from a Houston perspective, the University of Houston has always, they haven't, going back to the Southwest Conference days, that rivalry with Texas has always been one that, even though they haven't played really in years, no matter what, these Houston fans, they could not root against Texas any much harder. I mean, going back to last season or the year before when Texas lost in the first round of the NCAA tournament, they couldn't have been happier with that. Anytime Texas felt, when Texas lost to Kansas in football this past season, they were as happy as could be. Obviously, of course, regardless of whether, if they are for one season at least, if Houston in football has to play in Austin or if they have to come down here, that's going to be a game that you're going to have circled on your calendar, just because, one, it's not going to happen often. It doesn't happen often. And two, the rivalry is already there and it hasn't cooled off, even though these two programs haven't really seen each other within the last few years. I think those obviously are at the top of the list now. Once both OU and Texas go on their way to the SEC, I think obviously, of course, Baylor's got to be on the top of the list, both in all sports. And I know they haven't really played in football much, but going back to the COVID year 2020 season, they were supposed to play non-conference. And, less than 24 hours before the kickoff was supposed to start, Baylor has to call off the game because of COVID issues. And Dana Holderson and the football staff, they were not happy about it. And Dana Holderson went on Twitter. And I think... Yeah, I can't remember exactly what he tweeted, but I think he said, we're ready, we're going to play someone against Baylor. And then, obviously, of course, fast forward a couple months, the two schools are playing in the Final Four, and Dana Holgerson still says we wanted to play Baylor back in September, and we're ready to play them here in April. So that, obviously, of course, that has the potential to kind of explode into a rivalry. It's kind of been dormant, obviously, of course, going back to the Southwest Conference days, the rivalry is there, but it hasn't really been, as active just because they haven't played as much. And obviously, of course, an interesting perspective from the football perspective will be West Virginia, obviously, of course, with the history with Dana Holgerson whenever he has to go back and then play there. I think when you kind of turn it around and you look at some of the schools that really you couldn't care much about, and this is going to sound so mean the way you phrase it, but I think Kansas State is the school you kind of put up there just because, I feel like, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong since you guys have more experience, covering a Big 12 team, but Kansas State, at least from an outside perspective, kind of seems to be a forgotten team. A lot of times they're like, oh yeah, I forgot they were in the Big 12.
Totally.
No, yeah, you're right on that. It's not a team that you get super excited about when they're coming to town. Like maybe in those, years where they're really, really good at basketball or what the Colin Klein years of football, they were exciting. But for the most part, they're kind of one of the teams that's like, oh, it's Kansas State week. Maybe we'll just tailgate or have some fun. But yeah, you're definitely right on that. Dayon, you got anything to add on to the teams you're excited for and teams you're not so excited for?
The teams I'm excited for, I'm excited for TCU. I'm excited to see TCU, both football and basketball. I think they're going to take another steps. Basketball, they took one last season. I expect them to take another one. They have a really good head coach, Jamie Dixon. I remember from his days at Pitt when he had those really good basketball teams. And so football, they just got SMU coach. He's going over to TCU, and he was a high school coach at Texas. I think he's going to do a good job there. But another team that I'm not really excited to see is Iowa State. I mean, football, they've had some success. They've been okay, but in basketball, not so really. So I would have to put Iowa State in that. I really don't think Texas and Oklahoma will be in the Big 12 by the time we get there, so I'm not even going to mention them. I think they're going to be gone. But also West Virginia. I want to see West Virginia. Bob Huggins is going to Hall of Fame coach.
Right.
I want to see them specifically in basketball. I know they had a down year, but he's routinely a good coach and have his team really competitive. And so I can't wait to see that Bob Huggins, Kelvin Simpson matchup. That's another matchup that I'm excited to see specifically in basketball.
Yeah, I think the Big 12 basketball, like the coaches are really good, but also you have so many personalities. A lot of people will watch. Like, we like when West Virginia comes to town because Bob Huggins is he's hilarious to watch on the sidelines. He has his own personal stool, and he just sits like this a lot. And I'll tell you this, you mentioned Jamie Dixon. You got to watch out for him because he likes to be a sixth player on the court a lot of the time. He doesn't like to be on the bench. He likes to literally be a couple feet onto the playing surface.
Wow.
So you got to really watch out for that when y'all get TCU in town.
Watch your ankles. Tell your players to watch their ankles.
It pisses us off so bad.
So we've kind of talked about some rivalries, like obviously Houston, Texas Tech sets up to be one of those future Big 12 rivalries that I think will be pretty good. Y'all mentioned Baylor, so kind of besides Tech and besides Baylor, Andy, are there any other teams that you could see good future rivalries with in the future Big 12? If you want to include the new 4 teams coming in or any of the other existing Big 12
this would be
teams
like
that
across,
you think might be a solid rivalry for you
one
guys.
In particular.
Yeah, just one that feels that hatred, like no matter what you're playing against them, baseball, basketball,
I think,
football. That
one rivalry
that
could certainly carry over from the American Athletic Conference is certainly going to have to be Cincinnati, just with the history across all the sports that programs have had. I mean, for the longest, especially going to the men's basketball perspective, when Houston was kind of on the rise up and coming. Even this past year, it always seems like Cincinnati and Houston are meeting in the conference championship tournament. And I know Houston has gotten the better of Cincinnati the last couple of seasons, but before that, it was the other way around, where especially having to play at Fifth Third's Arena in Cincinnati, that crowd is one of the crowds that is always crazy, whether it be in football, whether it be in basketball. They're ready to be a Power 5 school. And obviously, of course, the history is there. That's certainly going to be a program that I'm pretty sure that the rivalry is going to carry over, just because of I know the men's basketball team has kind of taken a dip the last season, but they're kind of in a bit of a rebuilding phase, just retooling, but I'm confident that they're built back up there. And obviously, of course, football, they're just coming off the college football playoff. They'll probably are expected to be, obviously they're not gonna be expected to reach that level again this upcoming season, but keeping Luke Fickell, that's going to be a program they're not going anywhere. I'm interested to see how BYU turns out, because similar to Texas Tech, they're one of these schools that Houston has had a bit of recent history, and just going back to, I believe this was in 2019, November of 2019, when the men's basketball team played Houston. It was actually in Houston at the Fertitta Center, and I can't remember the name of the player, and I believe it was TJ Hawes, but I can't remember if that's exactly his name, but I remember he dribbled right, shot a fadeaway jumper over the outstretched hands. I believe it was Quentin Grimes, and he beat Houston at the buzzer. And on the road at Fertitta Center, he left the crowd stunned. And then obviously the following year, 2020, they meet in football, and that's Zach Wilson coming into town. Like I mentioned, the BYU fans traveled like crazy in that game. To be honest, probably because that was going to be one of the rare chances they had to see their football team live, just because of how crazy the attendance restrictions were during that season. But honestly, it was a very similar game to the Texas Tech game. where Houston kind of jumped out early. The defense did a really good job of kind of holding Zach Wilson in check, and then they just couldn't stop him. The floodgates open. I think that's going to be another program that's certainly worth keeping an eye on because of the recent history they've had.
Nice.
Dayon, you got any other possibilities with the rivalries that you want to shout out?
I mentioned TCU, but I think Andy hit it right on the head.
Yeah.
I think BYU and Cincinnati. I would even throw Oklahoma State in there a little bit. I think there's some bitterness because they were one of the teams who kept Houston from coming into the Big 12 a couple of years ago. And so I think fans are going to be excited about that Oklahoma State as well. So I have to throw them in there as well.
Okay.
So sticking with these new Big 12 teams and cities, what are some of the top Big 12 cities you might want to travel to for a game that might be fun for you?
Ooh, I know we mentioned Kansas.
Kansas basketball's got to be up there.
That's definitely up there. But Waco, of course. But I want to go outside of Texas. I want to go see. Where do I want to go?
I'm saying
it's tough because all these places are kind of hard to get to too.
Right.
Easiest place to get to would be Lubbock. Obviously, you can take a quick flight.
Right.
You don't want to take that 9-hour drive. I've done that before. It's not fun.
Yeah, definitely Lubbock. I definitely have. I've been down there once, but never for a sporting event. Definitely want to get down there, but I'm really excited. Oklahoma State. I've been down to Stillwater for a women's basketball game. I haven't been for a men's basketball game or a football game. I see on TV how they have the paddles hitting the stands, so they seem like there's big excitement. They're definitely on my list. Man, I just want to see the Big 12. I want to see the excitement, the difference between the American and the Big 12. So I want to. If I can, I'll go to all. I want to travel them all and see them all, man.
No,
Andy, to you.
Yeah, obviously I want to go to Provo and go see. No, I'm joking. You're not going to hear that often. Just in terms of, I think obviously the big thing that's circled has got to be Allen Fieldhouse and just be that atmosphere. When you look at the football perspective, not to sound like a broken record, but I think, being able to go to Waco and playing Baylor, playing TCU, those are the games you're circled. Even going up to Oklahoma State and playing, the Cowboys, I know Dayon mentioned it, that's one that has the potential to be a good rivalry, but just look at what they were able to do this past season in football. They're on the come up. Their basketball team had a down year, but in the past, they've been able to produce not only wins, but look, they ended up, I want to go back to 2019 when they played Houston. They were one of the other teams that came into Fertitta Center and beat Houston, so they have history as well. So I think you've got to add Oklahoma State to that list.
Yeah.
So to follow up with that, Andy, what's the tailgate scene like at U of H? And are they ready to move up? Is the tailgate scene ready to move up to the Big 12?
Dayon, you can add on to this, but I certainly think that the tailgating scene at Houston needs to upgrade, just like the rest of the facilities need to do. And albeit I'm not going to say the tailgating scene is terrible because certainly the Alumni Association does a good job of creating events and having, especially for football games, they have like their own section where people can go in. They have drinks, they have food, they have a good space for people just to hang out before the games. I can't remember exactly when it starts, but there's especially when it's like an afternoon game, there's people all going from the morning, staying up, leading up to the game, walking up to the game. There's always obviously, of course, the college students freaking chugging beers right before going in, and then it certainly is a party atmosphere, but I think it's not at the level yet when you think of a lot of these Big 12 schools yet. A lot of it has to do honestly with space, just in terms of where TDSU Stadium is. They have this giant parking lot right next to the stadium, which is about the only parking space it has, and everything else is kind of really cut off by a couple of roads that are there. So there's a little plaza where they can start building around, and it looks like they have plans where they're building that football specific facility to kind of convert that plaza into a space where people can kind of tailgate and stuff. But I think similar to the facilities, they have to upgrade. And to their credit, a lot of these tailgate kind of the people that are in charge, the organizations that are in charge of tailgates have certainly kind of acknowledged it and are looking to improve the tailgating scene for football games.
Yeah, I second everything Andy said. I think they need to upgrade the tailgating. I've been to other schools, even smaller schools, and like Texas State, their tailgating, in my opinion, is a different experience than Houston. I'm not going to say better, but it was definitely a different experience than Houston. And I mean, you really only get alumni and students there tailgating. And so I think just it goes back into our point earlier about Houston fans kind of being fickle and not really just coming out. And so maybe they get more excited and they tailgate more. The biggest tailgate that you have is homecoming. And I'm sure that's year round for all schools. But from what I hear from other Big 12 schools, it's not to equal as homecoming, but I wouldn't say to almost to the capacity, but fair share of a good amount of tailgating and a good experience at tailgating versus Houston. It's just okay if I'm being honest. I think they definitely have to upgrade in tailgating as well because that's part of the experience, especially with recruits. You want to come in, you want to see the tailgating, all that plays into the factor. And so I think Holderson and the entire administration, everybody was aware of it. Like Andy said, they're planning to make that experience even better, but it definitely needs to be better for sure.
All right, well, I'm going to kind of hand this over to you guys. Do you guys have any questions for us about Texas Tech, football, basketball, tailgate scene, anything you kind of want? Or if you want to save it for y'all's podcast, we're going to come on and jump on with these guys, in a few weeks. So
I love doing whenever you guys initially reached out. We're doing home and home, so we're here first. You guys will come to our show later. I guess the main question I wanted to ask you guys is just what were your guys' initial thoughts and kind of what's the perspective of obviously, of course, Houston mainly where it pertains to us, but kind of these other schools that are going to be joining, Cincinnati, UCF, or BYU. Do you feel like, obviously, of course, losing Texas and Oklahoma, that these 4 schools coming in will be able to provide, obviously not the level of brand recognition that Texas and OU have, but kind of more of a well-rounded group? What are your thoughts on those schools?
I think Houston in particular is the most ready school joining, and I'm excited about that because, like we talked to the UCF guys last week, we said football is ready, but they sound super nervous and scared about basketball. And they said they're going to get their ass kicked for a little bit. You guys are going to be coming in the 2 most major sports and be competitive right away. And so I think that's a lot of fun. I think it's kind of cool geographically how we're going to start to be very widespread. Usually it's a regional type thing, but Houston also being a super big city in South Texas helps out as well. But I think it's exciting adding these 4 teams to the conference.
Yeah, I agree. And while Texas and Oklahoma, we don't have a school to really carry the weight that they had for the conference, like the brands, like you said, the recognition of them, that is a lot of the Big 12 conference, but also Texas has really held the Big 12 conference back. When you look at we could have had a Big 12 network, but instead they had a Longhorn network, and that was the reason A&M and Nebraska and Colorado and Missouri and all those schools left and stuck us with 10 schools, and then they didn't want to add on to it. And so for us just kind of getting out of their shadow, I feel like is going to be exciting. I'm ready to not have to deal with all the repercussions that they cause. And so that's nice. And then I think we did a good job of picking the 4 teams. I think Houston's felt like y'all should have been in the Big 12 conference several years ago. Same with some of these other schools. Feels like they should have been upgraded into a Power 5 conference for a while now. So I feel like we're adding by subtracting in a way. And we're kind of waiting to see who's going to take the weight of the conference and what rivalries are going to propel the Big 12. And, we got a new commissioner coming in. Hopefully he can make the right decisions to lead our conference in the right direction over these next few years. But I think it's exciting times. It's nice to have some new blood in the conference. It's nice to have some new teams that are be coming to town, some new fan bases to interact with and deal with. And ultimately, I think they made the right call in getting you four guys up into the conference. And so I'm excited about the future. I'm excited about getting out of the shadow of Texas and just kind of seeing what the Big 12 has in store over the next few years. So it's all exciting for us, I think.
I know a two-part question for me. Do you think with those two schools exiting, it'll be more parity in football and basketball, as well as my second question would be about the football program. What are your thoughts about the football program, the new hire, and the direction and that it's heading? I know you really don't know yet because the coach kind of just got there, but what's the kind of the vibes around the new hire and the kind of the culture and what he's trying to build?
Yeah, so parity is going to be like, hopefully college basketball parity stays the same. Like Kansas has been obviously like conference champion about 16 out of the last 17 years. So, but I think we're adding in some pretty good teams like you guys. And so hopefully maybe that spreads the wealth a little bit more. Football definitely is going to be a lot more parity, I think, in the conference because Oklahoma's been kind of the dominant program in the conference. So you lose that. And now it's just kind of who wants to take the crown, right? Oklahoma State and Baylor have been your best two programs besides Oklahoma. Iowa State had their chance, but you know they're a big question mark. But you know, Tech, we're really excited. I think we got it. I think we got the guy, Joey McGuire. There's a lot of excitement around him. He's actually recruiting. We're actually getting high school recruits for once. It's really nice to see us. Top 10 in our 2023 class. Like that's stuff we never had with Cliff. We never had with Matt Wells. And so it's exciting times. Like I'm finally optimistic for the first time in about a decade. It's just been down, 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 down for us. And so for the first time, it feels like there might be a light at the end of this tunnel. That success can finally be coming our way. Can we get these young players, develop them, turn them into really good players, start winning some conference games? So our excitement for the football program, I think, is probably at the highest it's been since maybe when we hired Cliff. Dustin, anything you want to add on there?
Yeah, I totally agree. The football parity should become a lot better because Oklahoma's kind of dominated that for a while and Texas here and there. But basketball, I think it gets even harder.
Yeah, honestly.
Yeah, 4 teams. I know UCS said they're not quite ready yet, but the other 3 teams, or at least you guys, even Cincinnati, like y'all are probably up above what Oklahoma and Texas were providing for the last 10 years. You know, Like I think it stays at least the same. If not, gets even tougher. That's exactly what we need in this basketball conference.
Right.
Like, oh, sure, make the schedule even harder than it already is. Thanks. Yeah, Joey McGuire looks like a slam dunk hire before he's even coached the game. I'm also even more excited, I think, about the offense and Zach Kitley, the offensive coordinator hire, who you guys maybe have heard that name, who's familiar. He was OC at Houston Baptist 2 or 3 years ago. He was here previously with Cliff, with you guys, with Bailey Zappi. That crew, they gave us a hell of a game.
Yeah, they almost beat us.
Opening game 2 years ago. And then he went to Western Kentucky and crushed it up there again. So I'm really excited about McGuire bringing the energy and the recruits and the accountability across his staff and how many points Zach Kitley wants to score with this offense. It's really exciting. They have shirts that the offensive coaching staff wears. A lot of times they say 50 burger because he wants to score 50 points every game.
Yeah, and just to add on to our excitement, we haven't been season ticket holders in a while because it's kind of been a waste of money, but we're back in on the season tickets. That's how excited we are for Joey McGuire to right the ship, hopefully. Y'all got any other questions or?
Oh, I had one more. What's up with Houston always stealing our transfers lately? Like, you got Kyler Edwards last year. You got Malik Wilson from basketball this year. You had Tajon Henry from football last year. Like, what's the deal?
Sean Carter.
It's I don't know. That pipeline is there. It's you know, you guys introduce them to the college world, and then we take them and find a role. I don't know. It's just interesting. That kind of shows what the college world is. Just in general, with players and athletes transferring in and out. But it'll be interesting to see if that changes now in the Big 12. It'd be funny if you have all these Big 12 transfers going over to different Big 12 schools. So. I don't know, it's just a funny coincidence. Stay on, is there anything else you wanted to add?
Yeah.
Nah, I think it's just a coincidence. I think Tajon Henry being from Houston, that played a factor. And
Right.
Kyla Edwards was recruited by Kellen Sampson, so that kind of played a factor. And so, I don't know, I think it's kind of a coincidence. But I am interested. Y'all did lose a really good player who I really liked in Shannon in the basketball side, man. I really like that kid. What are you guys thinking about the basketball as far as the players you lost? You also lost McCullough. I forgot how you pronounce his name. He went to Kansas.
Yeah. That one hurt.
Yeah,
that one hurt.
We'll start with McCullough and get the bad one out of the way first, because that's a really sore subject, because he went in conference to a rival and kind of rubbed a lot of the Red Raiders the wrong way, because he was coming up on his last year. I mean, same with TJ Shannon, but the fact that he went to a rival and kind of contradicting himself with what he wanted to do here last year, like role in his role. Yeah. It kind of seems to me personally like he's just kind of going to jump on a team so he doesn't have to do as much and can be the third or fourth guy and doesn't have to be the one or two, and then create that mismatch. And he's going to look way better as the fourth option up there, and matching up against whoever they're playing's third or fourth option rather than their first or second best defender.
Yeah, it stung a little bit, especially because we just lost. We lost Chris Beard for that, and he stuck around, and he was like the guy who stayed, right? Him and TJ, and then of course they're both gone now. So his stung. TJ felt like he wasn't going to get any better at Texas Tech. Yeah. Like he's kind of plateaued here, and so he needed to go to another school to kind of maybe propel him to his hopeful NBA dreams of getting drafted. And it just felt like he couldn't really do more here, and so he needed to go to another school. From all things that I've heard is that he really did want to stay. But ultimately, I think Illinois was a good fit for him offensively. And so, for him, I wish him nothing but the best. For McCullough, I dearly hope we beat their ass 2 times.
Yeah. And I think it helps Tech. Like, I know those 2 guys transferred, but we brought in a lot of good transfers. And I think we have a really good history with Mark Adams and as Texas Tech with bringing in transfers and letting them flourish. I mean, we had that, Final Four run with Tariq Owens and Matt Mooney coming in, and every year we've just cycled in new guys. Adonis Arms, like on Brooks' shirt there, comes in and flourishes, and now gets picked up and goes to the Denver Nuggets for their summer league. So I think we've done really well with, even if we lose guys, we reload really well.
But guys, well, we've enjoyed our time with y'all. Let's Andy, let you kind of shout out everything on y'all's podcast where people can find y'all. If y'all need a Houston podcast to follow,
for sure. First,
go follow these guys.
Both
so
of y'all
shout out all y'all
welcoming
stuff.
us and giving us a platform to be able to talk. Really all things UH and Texas Tech and kind of the Big 12 as a whole. And this was a really fun time. I mean, it's kind of flown by. So thank you guys for this time. And in terms of us, where you can find us, obviously it's at Pawd Slama Jama on Twitter. That's PAWD. SLAMAJAMA, a bit of a long, but it's obviously, of course, it's an homage to the old Pawd Slama Jama teams in the 80s, with the basketball team. So, and also be sure to check us out on YouTube. That's a